In January 1517, Ottoman heavy artillery battered down the gates of Cairo. As the woods splintered, a 250-year-old empire collapsed. This engraving illustrates the immense scale of the landscape surrounding Cairo. Before the siege, this metropolis was one of the wealthiest, most heavily defended, and geographically massive Islamic capitals on Earth. The loss of Cairo ended a superpower built on a historical impossibility: absolute monarchs who were bought and sold as property. Their territory stretched across Egypt, the Levant, and the Hijaz. They possessed an unmatched combat resume, violently repulsing Crusaders and Mongols. Yet these commanders lacked royal bloodlines. They were an enslaved military class whose supply pipeline originated in Central Asia. How does a caste of enslaved foreign soldiers overthrow their masters to forge an international superpower? And why did an army that defeated the Mongols lose everything in a matter of days? The answer starts in the early 1200s. The Ayyubid dynasty, which ruled Egypt and Syria, found themselves surrounded by external threats and desperate for an elite, flawlessly loyal military force. To build this force, they looked to the remote steppes. Rulers began purchasing young Kipchak Turks from these arid, isolated plains, intentionally severing them from their homelands and biological families. In Egypt, these recruits were systematically retrained as Mamluks, freed slave soldiers. They were converted to Islam, drilled in complex martial arts, and armored as elite heavy cavalry, visibly outclassing the standard infantry marching alongside them. The training was psychological as well as physical. Masters treated the recruits like kin, replacing their lost biological families with their regiment. The soldiers developed absolute fanatical loyalty, not to a king or a nation, but to their specific military corps and commanders. The Ayyubids thought they were engineering the ultimate loyal guard body. In reality, they had imported, trained, and armed a highly autonomous political faction with the organizational capacity to stage a massive rebellion. That rebellion triggered in 1250, right in the middle of the Seventh Crusade. The new Ayyubid heir, Turanshah, took the throne and immediately attempted to sideline the most elite Mamluk corps, a group known as the Salihiyah. The Salihiyah reaction was swift and brutal. They mutinied, assassinated Turanshah in his camp, and seized absolute control of the Egyptian state, ruling in a fragile alliance with his widow, Shajar el-Dur. The slaves were now the masters. Over the following decades, this new Mamluk Sultanate entered a golden age. They poured their immense wealth into turning Cairo into an architectural marvel, commissioning intricate illuminated manuscripts and funding a massive cultural renaissance. Yet this glittering society contained a fatal structural flaw. Because they had no royal bloodline or standard rules of inheritance, passing the throne to a successor relied entirely on the brute military strength of competing senior commanders, known as emirs. The very mechanism that allowed the Mamluks to seize power in the first place, the rule of might makes right, guaranteed that their empire would suffer through centuries of violent internal friction and bloody succession wars. Looking at this antique map, you can trace the borders of a new, rapidly expanding superpower to the north, the Ottoman Empire. By the early 1500s, their territory was pressing aggressively against the Mamluk borders in Syria. The friction quickly sparked into outright conflict. Territorial disputes over southern Turkey escalated, compounded by the Mamluks providing strategic support to the Ottomans' fierce rivals in Persia. In 1516, the two Islamic superpowers clashed. The Mamluks suffered catastrophic frontline losses in Syria that shattered their northern defenses, leaving the geographical road directly to Cairo completely exposed. Decades of internal factionalism had taken their toll. The Mamluks' stubborn reliance on traditional cavalry charges left them completely outclassed by a unified Ottoman war machine equipped with modern firearms and artillery. By January 1517, the Ottoman Sultan, Selim I, reached the Egyptian capital. The final Mamluk Sultan, Tuman Bey II, attempted to defend Cairo using desperate urban guerrilla tactics, barricading streets and fighting house to house. But the outdated Mamluk defenders were simply overpowered. They were crushed by the overwhelming logistical force, gunpowder, and highly disciplined janissaries of the Ottoman military. The aftermath was devastating. An estimated 50,000 civilians died in the slaughter. The Abbasid Caliphate was terminated, and the Mamluk Sultanate was entirely absorbed into the expanding Ottoman Empire. The reign of the slave kings met a visceral end at the towering stone minarets of Bab Zuela. It was here that Tumen Bey II, the final Mamluk Sultan, was captured and publicly executed at the city gates. The Mamluk system proved that an elite military caste could seize an empire and hold it for centuries. But without a stable line of succession or a modernized arsenal, they were ultimately dismantled by a more efficient war machine.